much. The courage to know the difference, the courage to know what it is that I can change. And what I love about that is the fact that the reason why, I believe that the seminal reason why we come together is to continuously change and uncover the truth of who we are, to change our attitudes about ourselves, and to dive deeper into the truth. And so today's topic of self-acceptance is going to be a little different than the way you've perhaps heard this idea before. I came across a quote that I absolutely loved this week, and it said, "Be careful how you are talking to yourself, because you are listening." Be careful how you refer to yourself, whether that's even audible or whether it's internal. Be careful about the dialogue that you use to describe the quality of your being, the reason why you're here, your purpose, your talents, the whole enchilada, as they say, in regards to why you walk this earth. Be careful about how you talk about yourself, because you, the soul of you, the true identity of you, the true self of you, is listening. So today, determining then, if you're going to use a phrase like self-acceptance, I think it behooves us to look at what do we mean by self, to really look at self. It's funny because every time I've ever heard of that phrase, it was always in this context. I accept myself even with all my flaws. I accept myself even when I fail and I stumble, and even when I let myself or other people down. I accept myself, and yada, yada, yada. And you know what? There's validity with that. There is. I'll be honest with you, because if we've been so ensconced in self-deprecation and self-hatred, that's a beginning step. So there's value to that. But what I really want to encourage you is to realize it's just a step, and that we begin to change the dialogue about ourselves from just accepting what we perceive to be flaws into a greater reality, a greater definition of who we are. So determining what the self is requires us to revisit the reality of our being constantly. Constantly. And that's both thrilling and maddening, isn't it? But to constantly reevaluate the definition that we have about self. And so this past week, on Friday actually, it was so amazing. My great friend Tracy said, "Do you want to go to the temple with me?" And she's always saying, "Do you want to go to the temple with me?" And so I didn't know really what the temple was, but she was referring to the Hindu temple. And lo and behold, she said, "Seriously, when we drive through the gates and you see it, it's like you're in Delhi or something. It's like you're in India itself." And it was. I was like, oh my God, this Hindu temple. I Googled, do you know that the Hindu temple that is here is the largest Hindu temple outside of the country of India, in Atlanta? I mean, this thing is spectacular. And I got goosebumps just looking at it. And I love the fact that through trial and error, she had already gone through all of the things you're not supposed to do so that I would know not to do that. So she was like my personal shopper, my guide, and she took me. And so the temple itself is called a mandir. That's the word that they use to describe the temples in the Hindu culture. And inside the main area where they have a fire ceremony once a day, she told me where I was supposed to sit, how I was supposed to dress, and the women sat over here and the men sat here. And they come with this fire ceremony, and she guided me through that. But then afterwards, you can walk in that space, in the area of the temple, and surrounding the area are all these sacred images of gods and deities that are special and sacred to this particular sect. And those sacred images, or mirta, are there. And as I was walking and looking at the mirta, Tracy said, "Ask a question. Look inside if you want to develop your intuition." And so I was doing all of this, and I became transfixed by one image, by one deity. And I just was transfixed, and I looked, and it was a child. It had a childlike face. And as I read the description, it talked about how this particular person, at the age of 11, had begun on a barefoot quest to walk across the country of India, on his path of enlightenment. And so when he was 11 years old, he was called Gansham. Gansham, much like Siddhartha was Siddhartha before he became the Buddha. His name was Gansham when he was 11, but as he developed in his enlightenment, he was then called Swaminarayan. Swaminarayan. Please, if you are a Hindu expert, do not, I'm probably butchering these words, and forgive me ahead of time. So you can't have a cell phone. You can't even take the cell phone out because, now we've got the little pads that we can write things down on. And I'm looking and I'm going, I want to memorize this. And I was trying to do all of my brain activity exercises because it said that when he developed into Swaminarayan, he was the author of one of the main sacred texts of the Hindu language. And it gave the name of the text. And it was called Vakanumrat. Vakamnurat. And I thought, I got to get my hands on the Vakamnurat. I'm glad we're not live streaming because people would be typing, you're saying it wrong. But it is the Vakamnurat, and I kept going, Vakamnurat, right? Trying to remember this. She then takes me to the gift shop, and the first book that I see is the Vakamnurat. Right there on the bookshelf. It just jumped right out at me, right? And so we're going to go through every page today. We got comfortable chairs. Come on. But it's called the Vakamnurat, which are spiritual discourses of the Bhagwan Swaminarayan when he became enlightened. And so my topic was self-acceptance. And as I was looking through here, I came across this passage, and it said, the form of God transcends Maya and is free of all types of flaws. Now stop for a minute and think about our philosophical relationship with what we call God. We say that God is all that there is, including us. We are a part of that which is God. So all of the qualities of God are the qualities that are represented inside of us because there is no separation. It is all love. We are extensions and we are vessels. So I'm reading it. The form of God transcends Maya and is free of all types of flaws, but is for the sake of liberation that he appears to be like a human. In fact, God is devoid of each of the flaws that senseless people attribute to him. However, the intellect of the person attributing such flaws will never be freed of those flaws that he attributes to God. So as we internalize God, if we see and view God as flawed, then we are seeing ourselves as flawed. Perfect alignment. Specifically, a person who believes God to be full of lust will himself become intensely full of lust. A person who believes God to be full of anger will himself become intensely full of anger. A person who believes God to be full of avarice will himself become intensely full of avarice. And a person who believes God to be full of jealousy will himself become intensely full of jealousy, etc. In fact, whatever types of flaws a person attributes to God will ultimately cause misery to the person himself. Just as a fistful of sand thrown at the sun falls back into the thrower's eyes. On the other hand, if a person realizes God to be absolutely flawless, then regardless of his own situations, his own life, he himself becomes absolutely flawless as well. And so as I embraced that, I thought, what a wonderful, beautiful parallel, because we teach there's only one reality, one truth, one loving presence, but many paths to that presence, right? And so in this particular path in this Hindu text, it's saying that whatever our view, whatever our understanding, whatever our opinion of God to be, is simply a reflection of who we are, which is in perfect alignment with the science of mind. And as we looked at and finished our class this week on the science of mind, we looked at the chapter on the word Christ and the fact that Christ was not Jesus' last name, that Christ, it wasn't even Jesus H. Christ, which stood for Horatio. But that Christ is an essence. Christ is actually a principle. And by the word principle, what do you think we mean? We're talking about a system of consciousness, a system of belief. So the Christ It's a presence. It's an energy system. And that each of us then are what? We are the Christ. So whatever you are, whatever you identify yourself as a name, it is your name, the Christ, just as it was Jesus, the Christ. Because Jesus, that master teacher, taught us that there is no separation. He was not the divine exception. He was the divine example. And there were many divine examples. We just so happen in our Judeo-Christian upbringing to hear a lot about him. But in the Hindu religions and all the other religions, there were many who were masterful at embodying this idea of the Christ, that principle. And so when you talk about self-acceptance, let's just get down to the nitty-gritty. What you are to accept is the fact that you are the emanation of this principle. You are the emanation. You are the example, not the... Jesus wasn't the only one. You too, you and I each are examples of this particular energy, this level of consciousness. The fact that it's already there. Ernest Holmes said in that chapter he actually called it Finding the Christ, and we actually had fun correcting Ernest, because if you're finding something, that indicates what? That it's lost. And so we said, Ernest, and... So we very politely marked through the word finding, and we rewrote it, and we said revealing the Christ. And so by Holmes' definition then, Christ is the universality. I love that word. Universality, all inclusion, the universality of sonship embodied in any individual who recognizes this sonship. It is a universal idea of sonship upon which everyone is a member. So you all have a membership card to the Christ Club. You all have a membership card to the idea of the perfection, the energy, the consciousness of that which is there. The beautiful thing about that membership is whether you use it or not, you're still a member. There's no hidden fees or agreements in the fine print that says if you don't do this, you're excommunicated. You are always a part of that. The thing is with the word remember, if you look at that word remember, it's reassociating yourself with a membership or a memberhood of collective of the sonship of people. So to remember is to realign with the membership of the truth of your soul. And how many of us have forgotten? We have moments of clarity and moments of remembering, but we also have great lapses of forgetfulness. And if you just look at that from just a human perspective, it's amazing to watch that unfold. I was 21 years old, just green behind the ears, and I got off the bus in New York City. And I was like, hi, I'm here. And I had a big, thick Texas accent. And I thought I'd be so unique. And then, of course, every other person I met was from Texas going, hi, how you doing? And, but I had done summer stock the summer before, and I had met a girl who was in the chorus with me, who knew someone who had parents who lived across the street from an elderly woman in Brooklyn who was renting a room. And so I showed up. What's Brooklyn? And I got on the subway, and I rode the subway, the N train. I thought it was supposed to be E-N-D, end train. But it was the N train to Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, where I went knocking on this door with my little duffel bags at 21 to rent this room. And it was $75 a month. And I did not know how I was going to pay for that. So I had a room. I had bathroom privileges, and I had a shelf in the refrigerator. And that was my existence in my beginning in New York City. And, you know, over time, she was, I would guess, in about her mid-80s, Norwegian. And over time, we developed an affinity for one another. And I think, like most things, she became a little protective of me because I would ride the subway into Manhattan. I'd be gone all day, knocking on doors and trying to audition, and then I would ride the subway back. But there was a loving relationship that had unfurled until one day I came back. And in this small little brownstone where her dining area was, All of the drawers had been pulled open where her curio cabinet was, where all of the plates and the dishes and the flatware and the silver and all the things, and they were all strewn all across the table. And she had this glazed look on her face. And she started pointing at me and she started yelling at me, "You stole my silver! You stole my silver! You stole..." She had called her son, who had called the cops. The Brooklyn cops. I'm a 21-year-old from Texas. I don't know nothing about that. And long story short, what had happened was just she had had an episode of dementia that had never been exhibited before. The silver was there. Nothing was missing. But I bet many of you who have been caretakers for people who have gone through the challenges of dementia or Alzheimer's or something like that, you've been accused of something that wasn't necessarily, it wasn't the truth. Let's just put it that way. And when I think about that, the fact that there it was, but there was such a commitment in the accusation, reminds me a little bit of almost spiritual dementia. And the fact that we are so forgetful and so accusatory and so judgmental and blaming of people who are different than us, or something that we feel is attacking of us, that we have at our very core forgotten. We have forgotten that we, the self of us, is this part that is the Christ. We have forgotten, just like the Hindu text said, that whatever it is that we think about God, but look at it this way, if everyone's God, an expression of God, then whatever I think of another individual, another soul, is being thrown back at me. Is really the reality, is really the reflection of who and what I am. And so this idea of the self runs so deep because you get that the self is not isolated. When I say self-awareness, I'm not talking about just me, David. I'm talking about the community of souls, the oneness of souls. That self-awareness. Do you know what that requires of you and I? That means that I have to look at the world of effect, and I have to love what it is that I see. I have to love the individuals. I have to love those that appear to be doing something against me. It is my job to love that because that is the self of me. That is the self of me in a forgetful spot. That is the spiritual dementia. That is the forgetfulness that sweeps across. It doesn't make it real. But what is real in this self-awareness is what Ernest Holmes called the Christ. The membership, we are members of the one. We are members of the one, yet we can deny that or we can forget that. One of those stresses, about choosing to walk this path sometimes is the fact that we run up against so much forgetfulness. But can you allow that then to be beautiful and an opportunity for you and I to look back and go, where am I forgetting that about myself? And begin, as we take our own self-healing, then we emanate that self-healing again back to the world. It works both ways. So when I take responsibility for the love of this self, automatically that energy goes out and creates a wave of permission, an energy of permission for other people to wake up. Have you ever been in the presence of someone who's fully awake? And by that I mean spiritually awake. Doesn't it make you want to become more awake? Doesn't it make you want to strive to dive deeper into your own self-inquiry and to know the truth of who you are? So Ernest said that the Christ is the embodiment of divine sonship, which has come with varying degrees of power to all people, in all ages, and to every person in some degree. Christ is a universal presence. Christ is not a person, but a principle. And so you are the Christ. So then self-awareness, the self then equals the divine. Divine acceptance. That's what we're here to do, to accept our divinity, to accept our outrageous, beautiful, non-flawed divinity. And the gorgeousness of that, and the hugeness of that, and the infinite potentiality of that. And to accept that means to allow it in. So my daily practice is to allow in my divinity, not to go searching for it, not to go working for it, not to go seeking, but to allow that which already exists to be revealed and to be welcomed and allowed in. And so in our summer book, The Untethered Soul, he's in the very last chapter, the one that we're going to focus on this week, called The Loving Eyes of God. Michael Singer says, the fruit on the tree willingly gives itself to everyone. Do any of the forces of nature differentiate? Does anything in God's creation other than the human mind pass judgment? Can you imagine if a bush or a tree said, I don't like you? And then it just pulled its shade back in. Said, nah, I don't like you very much. There's just complete and utter love and utter sharing. And many wise teachers have said that nature is our greatest teacher. That nature in and of itself teaches us the beauty of non-differentiation. And he goes on to say, nature just gives and gives to whoever will receive. To whoever will receive. I have to interject here and I say, the Christ principle gives and gives and gives to whomever will receive. And so should you choose not to receive it, it doesn't punish you. You punish yourself because you choose not to receive. If you say to the light, I will not look at you, I'm going to live in the darkness, the light just keeps on shining. If you say to God, I don't believe in you and want nothing to do with you, creation continues to sustain you. So even when we deny that sonship of us, that Christ principle, that self that is divine, even when we deny it, it continues to remain and to sustain for the days of our life. So are we crazy or what to deny that any longer? How in the world would it serve us to turn something away? It's as if the fruit of the tree is there, and whether you partake of the fruit of that tree or not, the fruit will continue to be there. And so as we understand this more and more and more, we realize that what we are cultivating then is a relationship with the self. How many of you like to cultivate relationships? And what we do when we become semi-conscious is that we want conscious relationships. We want authentic relationships. And isn't that funny? That's what we put on our profiles, Match.com. I want authentic, conscious relationships. When did you actually stop and say, am I conscious and authentic? Because it always is a to the degree principle. To the degree that I am conscious and authentic about the relationship that I have with self is the degree in which I begin to magnetize to me conscious and authentic people. And so we get to sort of give up and let go of the idea that there's no good ones out there. You know, that's like saying God's no good. So whatever you think of God comes back to me. And you start to think about how much we are in judgment. How much we are in judgment. And hopefully we can laugh a little bit about that so that we can begin to let that go. If we look at our judgment, which we all participate in, our separations, our opinions, if we can laugh about those things, we can begin to let go of those more readily and more easily and just realize that all we've been is asleep. We've had a little bit of spiritual dementia, and now we're coming back to life again. When I turned 40, just a few days ago, 15 years ago, Lord, where does it go? I went to Peru. I hiked the Inca Trail. I was going to spend the month of June in Peru, and I was having all these adventures and traveling and looking for shamanistic experiences. And I picked up a newspaper in Cusco, and it was in English. And I read an article, and the article said that there was this town. It was off of the beaten path. It was not a tourist destination. In order to get to this town, you had to buy a bus ticket, and it was a 3-hour ride, but it was worth it. Because there you would meet these Peruvians in this village who made beautiful and amazing pottery. And they built this thing up, and they said, we want people to come. there because we want this community to thrive. And I said, I'm all for it. Sign me up. And so I looked at the instructions in the newspaper article, and I went to the Cusco bus station where I bought my bus ticket to this village. And I walked onto the bus, and I went, oh, my God. It smelled. It was dirty. But I sat, I mean, I was dirty anyway from hiking and stuff, but I sat down, and you could see the grease marks on the headrest before you. And it was like a bench-type bus seat. There was my seat and somebody next to me. And so what do we do in America? If there's two seats, then two people sit on those seats. Well, in Peru, it's a little bit different because there's the Peruvian Board of Tourism right now calling. Because in a Peruvian bus, it has nothing to do with the number of seats. It's however many bodies can be crammed into the vehicle itself, along with a couple of goats and some chickens and some things that move around in a burlap bag that I really didn't want to see. So here I am, and I'm sitting in here, and I realize that I don't know how to communicate with a lot of these people. I know the name of the village in the article, but how do I tell the bus driver, who is now at least 40 people dense in front of me, that that's where I want to go? And I'm trying to communicate with the man, and through a series of quite humorous default language systems, he lets me know that what the name of the village before that would be, so that when they stopped at that stop, then I should try to squeeze my way to the front of the bus. And so I paid attention, and after 3 hours, I finally got to there, and I got the attention of the bus driver, and he drops me off in the middle of this road in the middle of Peru. And in the article it said, walk 1 kilometer this way, turn left, and there will be this village. And I walk 1 kilometer, and I turn left, and there's a ditch. So I walked a little further, and finally I found a little trail that led me to a village where it looked as though absolutely no one lived there. I saw several children, naked children, running through the street, but other than that, I saw no adults. I saw a tent that had been set up by archaeologists that had all kinds of archaeological tools out, but I saw no archaeologists. I saw no pottery. And I was ready to buy some pottery. And I thought, oh my God, what I did find was some amazing ruins. And I went into these concentric circle ruins, and I sat and I did some spiritual practice. But then the article said, when you're done, simply walk back out to the road and wait for buses coming the other way. And so I walked out to the road, and I waited for buses to come the other way. Now, granted, you are right on the equator, so the sun is bearing down, and I have no hat. And I could feel the sun burning my scalp. And I was not wise. I didn't bring hardly any water or any food provisions. But I'm thinking, no worries, because the bus is going to come. Now, remember my attitude about the bus going? I was very judgmental about that bus. The judgment began to dissolve as I stood there waiting for a bus to take me back. I think that's very much like life, isn't it? Where we have a judgment about a particular thing when we feel so uppity and separate from it. But when we start to realize that everybody's one, everything's the Christ, that bus is the Christ. Then I'm ready to get down on my knees and worship that Christ. And so I wait, and about 20 minutes a bus does come, and I do this, and I'm flagging it down, and I'm flagging it down, and I'm flagging it down, hoping that it'll stop as it's coming down this road, but it doesn't slow down. And as it comes by me, the bus driver's going, because crammed into that, if I thought my bus going was full, the one coming back, people's faces were against the mirror. And I just watched as it went. And so I turned back around and I thought, where's the bus schedule? And so I waited, and I waited another almost an hour. And I thought, I can't move. I've got to stand by the side of the road. and I've got my backpack over my head to try to shade me. Anything that I could do. The next bus comes, the same thing happened. Now, at this time, I start to remember stories that I read about people in the Australian outback whose cars break down, and then they find them months later, eaten by buzzards. And so here I am, and this is it. I'm going to be eaten by buzzards. And I'm making peace, in my heart. I had a good life, It was a good 40 years. And finally, about another hour, another bus comes, and I make my last attempt, and he stops. And as the doors, the double doors open, and I get in, that's as far as I got. And as it continued, it was my face that was on the thing. And you're thinking, there is no way that anybody else can be let into this bus. There must have been at least 4 little towns, 4 little villages after that, where it was the end of the day, and so this was the chief transportation of all the migrant field workers. And so as the door opened, all those migrant field workers came in, and I literally was moved to the middle of the bus with my legs almost off of the ground. And my face was in the burlap bag of a migrant worker, and I was so happy. Because what I knew is that I was a part of the Christ. So you see, when I rode there, I thought, how primitive. When I rode back, I thought, how precious. And that's the shift in consciousness that takes place when you and I wake up. You see, because in our separation, it's very primitive, regardless of how sophisticated we think we are. See, that arrogance that gets into us thinks that we're sophisticated, when really what we are is we're primitive. But when we began to let those barriers down, when we begin to realize that everything is a gift. See, the Christ principle realizes that everything is a gift, even the things that we label as difficult, even the people that we label as difficult. If everything is there to align with our growth, and if you would think about it that way, if you could, instead of saying, why is this happening to me? If you could say, why is this happening for me? And you start to see that everything that is a conflict, everything that is an abrasion, everything that is uncomfortable is there to assist us into moving more and more and more into the energy of that Christic consciousness. And that level of self-acceptance, what happens, see, and here's the thing, once you go there, you can't go back. Once you tap into that level of self, try as you might to not partake of the fruit of the tree of plenty. Try as you might to deny that. You have already opened the portal of Christ consciousness in your mind. And so it is not for us to turn back, but it is for us to realize how precious we are, how precious everything is. How precious all of these situations that we find ourselves in, to accept that. Because what you are accepting in regards to the self, is your divinity. I don't know about you, but I did not grow up in a philosophy that talked about this. It was almost as if we had to put a shield on about every Sunday about how awful we were. And now we're at a point in our lives where we're taking the shield down. What's amazing is that even though we're not in that environment, sometimes that message still lives and breathes in our being. And it isn't until you start to really open the door to a new reality, a new dimension, that you even get how much residue is still there, how much wounding of your religiosity is still there. And we get to say, you get to let that go. You get to let that go. Particularly when you are accepting the self that is divine. And so, what do you choose to accept today? What do you choose to accept today about you? And what I understand and what I celebrate is that with every every sliver of willingness, you start to attract people who are doing the same thing. You start to align with people of light and with people of beauty and people of vision. And I don't know about you, but I want to spend the remainder of my days in this form with people of vision and people of light. And if I can't find it in the people that I'm with, then I get and know that I'm the bus that gets to take them and to shake them out of their spiritual amnesia and to not diminish myself in the process, but to stand strong in the root of my knowing and to accept myself as divine. And so it is.